Hello, you're listening to Environmental Soup through the facilities of Trent Radio. And my name is Rob. You might be listening on YouTube as well. I do hope to have my previous week's episode up on YouTube. And today I will talk about environmental assessments. The proposed changes to environmental assessment law in Canada. And I'll focus on that, and I will read something that I wrote on Facebook. The federal government under Carney is proposing in a discussion paper the ability to kill endangered species if they get in the way of projects. This is concerning. There is a growing number of rights of nature cases around the world. Previously, I made a video related to Lake Winnipeg and the right of nature. And if you want more information about rights of nature, that is a good video to start from. I plan on making additional videos related to that topic as there are more and more cases within what is known as Canada. And from the discussion paper, which I will get into, there's a comment period. Given the GIC, government and cabinet, limited power with a high threshold to be met to exempt specific projects from the application of the jeopardy test for species at risk, but only if it's in the public interest and if the proponent has made all reasonable efforts to avoid or reduce the impacts on at-risk species. This could mean that under specific circumstances, endangered species could become extinct because of projects that the federal government wants to implement. I am going to transition to some of the articles that I found this week. We don't want to hear what people are against, Carney tells Vancouver audience after pipeline criticism. And this is in the National Post and under the MSN website. And the article says, there's a quote, "What we're trying to accomplish, and I think we're really gaining momentum now across the country, is we don't want to hear what people are against, we want to hear what they're for." And this was in front of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade in British Columbia. And in relation to the government of Alberta, Premier Daniel Smith and Carney signing an agreement related to building more pipelines. And the Premier of British Columbia is against the proposal. And then the government is talking about the colony was being critical of the Premier. This is troubling because the federal government is ignoring real environmental concerns from the government of British Columbia and not imposing fossil fuel projects. There are also plenty of fossil fuel projects that British Columbia does support, or other projects. So it is very disingenuous. And at the same time, we are in a climate emergency, so we shouldn't be subsidizing fossil fuels over and over again. There's a second article, and this is in the Guardian newspaper. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is not the climate guy you thought, by Seth Klein. And this guy is related to the NDP leader. So there is potential bias that way. But I still think it's a good article. So the Prime Minister, the article points out that the Prime Minister had a book in 2022 talking about the existential threat of climate change. And then the article says that Mark Carney did not live up to the reality, and says that Carney almost never talks about the climate crisis anymore. So we're getting two versions of the same guy. And then his government, the article points out, repealed almost every climate mandate introduced by Justin Trudeau. This included the carbon levy, anti-greenwashing legislation. Oh, that says it's been flagged for rolling back. The zero emissions mandate has been delayed. And then there's a corresponding drop in electric vehicle sales. There's the exemption of some of the projects that are nation building from environmental law. There's tax credits for fossil fuel, especially around oil recovery and carbon capture. There was an agreement to build a pipeline. The Climate Action Network said of the deal with Alberta, it's a sledgehammer to one of the last remaining pillars of Canada's climate plan. They delayed Carney significantly delayed and weakened Canada's industrial carbon price from $170 a ton by 2030 to $130 by 2040. So less per ton and over a longer period of time. So there's less of an incentive to change operation, reduce emissions in the economy. And Mark Carney was the governor of the Bank of England and Canada at one point. So, and argued about the effectiveness of carbon pricings and climate. And then he promised to strengthen the industrial carbon price, but has done the opposite. And this was after eliminating the consumable carbon price or levy. So that's from The Guardian. I did talk about this article last week. Mark Carney runs roughshod over the environment. It's worse than what Harper did. It looks like that episode will be audio only. And I'm just going to see if I'm still recording video. Yeah. And it says that there was an announcement that came on Friday of I think it was last week, or this is May 8th, so a couple weeks ago, that the streamlining infrastructure projects, the government is moving further to the right, i.e. conservative, than the Liberals have ever seen. Anna Johnson, a staff lawyer at West Coast Environmental, said to the Star, quote, "This would represent by far the worst evisceration of environmental law in Canadian history, far worse than what happened under Prime Minister Stephen Harper's government in 2012. And Stephen Guilbeault, who is a Liberal MP and a member of the government, as well as former environmental minister, said, "It's worse than what Harper did." I agree. And I have read since then that 14 members of the Liberal Party are concerned about the weakening environment. This is concerning. And Guilbeault said, quote, "We will have no way of evaluating or understanding what are the human health and environmental impacts of projects we are approving, and that the main criteria to evaluate projects moving forward, if this is adopted, is going to be economic development, and nothing else will matter." Phil Potton of Environmental Defense said the government proposal would grant any company or project the government chooses a blank check to just drive entire species to extinction or exploration. Exploration means that they're no longer in an area. Extinction means that the species is gone entirely. And I mentioned that at the introduction. Then I found a CBC article, Carney's government planning changes to speed approvals for pipeline. And this article from CBC is saying that pipelines will be easier to build. And from reading the proposals, it is very concerning. And I also found a Norway article called "From Pipelines to Mines, Canada's Environmental Reviews Could Be Transforming. Here's How." The government is creating federal economic zones, and developments can be pre-approved. And this is concerning. Pre-approved projects are concerning because it means it will be more difficult to make public participation meaningful because a government has already made a decision with the effect of it being pre-approved. And on my personal Facebook page, I wrote, if a project is pre-approved, it would logically mean that it is in violation of treaty rights under Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, which is the requirement to consult with Indigenous nations, and would also not align with the public participation recommendations from the 2017 recommendations Building Common Ground, a new vision for impact assessments in Canada. This is due to the inability to impact a decision. How would the government walk back from a project where the damage from construction is already started and is pre-approved? The proposed changes in environmental assessment don't make sense for this reason, and they risk legal challenges. There is another scenario that might happen if a decision is not to approve a project after it is half built for environmental or other reasons. The company, the proponent, might take legal action against the government as well, as people who are concerned about the environmental impact of a development. So that's one item. It is the proposal, the discussion paper is open for comment until June 7th, and I will post it on my YouTube page, my Substack, and on the Environmental Soup Facebook page as well. And they're making the argument that Canada is better able to compete with other countries. However, this is not necessarily the case, as other countries want strong environmental laws, and people are moving away, governments are moving away from fossil fuels. I made a video about the impacts of war on my YouTube page, and oil the reliance on oil is increasing the threats of increasing the vulnerability from other countries. This is the article also says that another MP, McKenna, a former Liberal MP, also said that the Carney's proposal would lead to a lack of trust and lawsuits. And lawsuits make the approval process slow. That was in the case of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It was slowed down because of legal action, because the government did not properly consult indigenous nations, among other factors. EcoJustice said that it is the biggest rollback of environmental protection in a generation. And it said that in economic zones, the government would pre-approve certain developments subject to conditions and exempt projects from requiring individual environmental reviews, instead of just requiring one overarching assessment. And then there's comparisons to Bill 5. Bill 5 was a similar legislation which also has special economic zones, which exempts itself from a lot of legislation. And those critics which say that the law was threatening wetlands, endangered species, and there is currently a court challenge. The federal economic zones would be enabled through regional assessments, and they're changing who does the environmental assessments. And then it says the article points out that Stephen Harper tried to accelerate timelines. That's one of the proposals, to accelerate some of the timelines. And then there's exemptions to species at risk law and fish permits. And I talked a little bit about the jeopardy test. The Species at Risk Act has a jeopardy test that restricts permits for activity affecting the species or critical habitat unless the government believes the activity will not jeopardize the survival or recovery of species. And the proposal would exempt projects from the application of that test. I am definitely concerned about that. And all the construction activity can be started, and after Ontario's change, which was similar to these proposed changes, it is even more concerning because some threatened fish and birds are only protected by federal laws. And that's the end of the article. And I'll look at the I'll start looking at the discussion paper. If you're listening over the radio, I will, or through the facilities of Trent Radio, I will go more in depth on my YouTube channel, but I will start talking about it for the last couple minutes. Those Getting Major Projects Built in Canada discussion paper on proposed legislative, regulatory, and policy reform. There's a bit of context. And then there's some guiding questions at the end. And does it say when there is a deadline? I will check. I don't think it did. Well, maybe it doesn't say when there's a deadline, but I know it's like in June. And there you have the overview of the proposals and who is it being sent to. I'll find that out. And so just going quickly, the overview. Those federal review and decision making in no more than 1 year. One Crown consultation process. One project decision. These are the headings. Single project authority. Enable economic zones through regional impact assessment. Streamline and efficient regulatory environment. And there's Indigenous engagement questions, public and Indigenous engagement questions. There's 8 different questions that they have. And I'll just pick one or two. From your perspective, how could these legislative, regulatory, and related policy amendments be adjusted or expanded to better align with the rights and interests described in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? And another question is, what do businesses and Indigenous people require to advance major projects within a shorter time frame under these proposals? So it looks like some of these questions are leading questions. They don't have to be answered. Yeah, and I hope that you have a good rest of your week. I know that there's a lot of environmental news happening, and this is one item that's up for consultation until the beginning of June. Thank you for listening. If you're online, if you're over the radio. Yeah, so it's still here. I will get into more of the the proposals. One is being no more than a year. The federal impact assessment and permit reviews will happen at the same time instead of one after the other. 1 year is problematic because some projects are very technical in nature, and a one-size-fits-all approach might not work in every case. It might mean title, a lot of missed things. These are like hundreds of pages long documents. There'd be less opportunities for public engagement. There'd be less baseline data as well. So those are some of the concerns. They did say that the deadlines will not change Canada's duty to consult Indigenous communities or fulfill obligations under modern treaties. I do like that. I do think that it would have an impact if it has to be under a year. I do feel that way, because those participant funding would be needed, and then there has to be adequate time for Indigenous nations to provide meaningful input using traditional knowledge. And then there's the One Crown consultation process. I'm not sure about the One Crown consultation process. I know that there's a lot of issues around consultation. There was a lot of issues around capacity. But I also recognize that each nation is unique. And having... It sounds like... I'm not sure, but it sounds like the government is treating all the nations as one instead of individual nations. It does say each Indigenous group affected by a major project, they'd go through... it does say one clear and coordinated consultation process. There's one project decision. That might make sense. I'll have to look into that more. The one federal decision document would be issued to the Minister of Environment, Climate Change, and Nature. The document would include all federal decisions required for a project to move forward. They're making changes to legislative changes for certain projects listed under physical activities regulations of the Impact Assessment Act. There was a single project authority I'm not sure, but I'll have to look more into this single authority. Economic zones are very concerning. They allow the federal government to um, exempt a lot of corporations or the government itself from environmental laws or other laws. They would cover transportation corridors, telecommunications, energy production and transmission, and industrial regions. And would remove the need for separate project reviews. And then the governor and council would have the authority to decide certain developments within these zones are pre-approved. I think I mentioned how concerning pre-approving is. It does say that there would be consultation with indigenous people. The government has had a bad track record of engagement with indigenous nations. There's a streamlined and efficient regulatory environment. They would narrow the types of activity that require navigation permits. They would make permits for fish and fish habitat more flexible for offsetting. Offsetting has its own set of issues. It can be very problematic if it's not done correctly, and as a last resort. It doesn't sound like this would be used as a last resort from how it's worded. And that is concerning to me because it leads to greater habitat destruction, and when combined with changes to provincial legislation in Ontario, I'm troubled by that. Because there's less habitat for endangered species, and fish habitat has been used to protect landscapes that or other species that have been under threat. Though ensuring project requirements are technically and economically feasible. They're allowing all the construction activities to start before an impact decision is made. If necessary, permits are approved. I'm not a fan of early construction, especially before the impacts are known. That is troubling to me. And I think I spoke to that as an issue. They're authorizing the Minister of Environment, Climate Change, and Nature to address impact assessment conditions in exceptional circumstances. I don't know what those exceptional circumstances are. It sounds like it's not just science and informed by the impact on the environment. And then they're authorizing the Minister of One Canadian Economy to address environmental conditions for projects of national interest when needed. So that sounds like a way to override environmental protection. And I don't think that the economy should, an economic minister should be involved in decisions around whether or not to protect an individual species. I am supportive of the rights of nature. Individual species should have the right to exist. The landscapes, the habitat, they should have the right to live in a healthy habitat, and the right for the landscapes to exist and be healthy. Yeah, and then the 8th point is troubling. And then I might be able to answer some of these questions. I didn't look at them in advance. And what time? How much time have? So there was a question from your perspective: how could these legislative, regulatory, and related policy amendments be adjusted or expanded to better align with the rights and interests described in the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People? I believe that the arbitrary timelines, remove that, get rid of pre-approvals, and remove special economic zones. Those are 3 key things. Require participant funding, and indigenous knowledge, treat each nation uniquely, as well as include urban indigenous voices. And if you include the public, there should be better. Including the public also improves the participation of indigenous people, because indigenous people are also members of the public. So making it easier to include them. And then those, are you aware of any intersections between the proposal and the rights and interests of First Nations, Inuit, and or Métis set out in the United Nations Declaration? I'm aware that a lot of Indigenous nations are opposed to special economic zones, and then from your perspective, how can the government of Canada best work in partnership with Indigenous people to ensure that Indigenous perspective, knowledge, and priorities meaningfully inform the implementation of these proposals? There was a court case related to the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I think this is it. The court case was the Federal Court of Appeals decision, Sisla Watwa Nation. I'm not sure if I pronounced this nation's name correctly. Versus Canada in the Federal Court of Appeals. I wrote down some of the paragraphs. And I should say that I'm not Indigenous as well. So paragraph 486 says the duty to consult is grounded in the honor of the Crown and the protection provided for existing Aboriginal and treaty rights in Section 35(1) of the Constitution Act 1982, the duties of the Constitution, and if required, accommodation form part of the process of reconciliation and fair dealing. And let's see, 496. And then 496 says the common. And good faith is required. The common thread on the Crown's part must be the intention of substantially addressing, it says in brackets, Aboriginal concerns as they are raised through a meaningful process of consultation. And the controlling question in all situations is what is required to maintain the honor of the Crown and to effect reconciliation between the Crown and Aboriginal peoples with respect to the interests at stake. And it says meaningful consultation is not intended to simply allow Indigenous peoples to blow off steam before the Crown proceeds to do what it always intends to do. And this is paragraph 499. Consultation is meaningless when it excludes from the outset any form of accommodation. And paragraph 500, the duty is not fulfilled by simply providing a process for exchanging and discussing information. There must be a substantive dimension to the duty. Consultation is talking together through mutual understanding. And paragraph 501 says meaningful consultation is not just a process of exchanging information. Meaningful consultation entails trust testing and being prepared to amend policy proposals in the light of information received and providing feedback. Where deep consultation is required, a dialogue must ensure that leads to a demonstratively serious consideration of accommodation. The serious consideration may be demonstrated in the Crown's consultation-related duty to provide written reasons for the Crown's decision. So that means that having pre-approvals would be violation of, would not meet the definition of consultation because there was no dialogue and there's no method for which a project could be considered or changed as a result of the consultation. And let's see. And then the Crown is 503 says the Crown is obliged to inform itself of the impact the proposed project will have on an affected First Nation. How can the government do that if it already approved the project, pre-approved. And then, if appropriate in circumstances, communicate its findings to the First Nation and attempt to substantially address the concerns of the First Nation. And let's see, where am I? Then I'll go to Control F. 557. It said that 557 said that Canada's execution of Phase 3 of the consultation process was unacceptably flawed and fell short of the standard prescribed by jurisprudence of the Supreme Court. As such, the consultation process fell short of the required mark for reasonable consultation. And then 558 says, to summarize my reasons for the conclusion, Canada was required to do more than receive and understand the concerns of Indigenous applicants. Canada was required to engage in a considered, meaningful two-way dialogue. Canada's ability to do so was constrained by the manner in which its representatives on the Crown Constitution team implemented their mandate. For the most part, Canada's representatives limited their mandate to listening to and recording the concerns of the Indigenous applicants and then transmitting those concerns to the decision makers. And let's see, 559. Uh-oh, 560. Canada's unwillingness to depart from the board's findings and recommended conditions so as to generally understand the concerns of Indigenous applicants and then consider and respond to those concerns in a genuine and adequate way. And Canada's erroneous view that it was unable to impose additional conditions on Trans Mountain were impacted from the ruling. 567. Well, in summary, the duty to consult might be impacted from the proposed changes, especially the pre-approved section. And this is a lengthy court decision, so I won't go too further into that. I'll go back to looking at the document that I looked at earlier. So yeah, I guess I looked at a lot of the questions. There was an earlier proposal. Stephen Harper tried to limit consultations. Not limit consultations, limit the decisions. And then the Impact Assessment Act, the Canadian Environmental Law Association made a briefing note called Briefing Note on Canada's Impact Assessment Act. The hashtag Battle Rules or Neither Battle No Rules by Richard Lindgren. So this goes into the some of the past changes. And some of the concerns some of the environmental concerns. There was discussion of the agency or minister to determine the scope of the factors to be considered during the impact assessment process. The discretion of the minister to substitute equivalent provincial processes for federal impact assessment process where appropriate was another concern. And then I have Canada's proposed Impact Assessment Act, how to regain public trust through appropriate amendments. Submissions of the Canadian Environmental Law Association to the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development regarding Part 1 of Bill 67, Impact Assessment Act, and this was presented in 2018. And I highlighted something about said many drawbacks under the previous Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012 is that many of the most important decisions about how project is to be undertaken have already been made in non-participatory manner before the current assessment process is even initiated, and I think these proposals will make things worse. And then they Sela made a point about the time limits. Sela submits that a standard timeline may not necessarily work for all the different types, scales, and location of designated projects that are subject to agency-led assessments and reports. And those are the things that I highlighted. I don't think I highlighted anything else. So that's under different an oral comment, but it's still relevant to what we were talking about today. And let's see here. Oh. And then I looked at the Building Common Ground, a new vision for impact assessment in Canada, the final report of the expert panel for the review of environmental assessment processes. And I highlighted a few things. One of the recommendations is sustainability be central to environmental assessments. I don't think that sustainability is the focus of these proposed changes. And the federal environmental assessment should decide whether a project should proceed based on that project's contribution to sustainability. And then I highlighted ongoing public participation opportunities that are open to all. Results of public participation should have the potential to impact decisions. Again, if a project is pre-approved, I don't see how that could impact decisions. Let's see. And then it says time limits and cost controls that reflect specific circumstances of each project rather than the current one-size-fits-all approach. This is a recommendation that these proposals do not follow because it directly says that there is a time limit of not more than a year. That's a one-size-fits-all approach. And then there's a lot of other recommendations in this report. I recommend checking that out. And let's see. Oh, I did look at the Impact Assessment Act. And then, special economic zones. I made a couple of highlights. Those special economic zones, lessons from the global experience by Douglas Zing. PEDL synthesis paper series. The report says special economic zones have mixed results globally. And then measuring the impact of special economic zones presents a challenge due to lack of data and due to difficulty finding appropriate enterprises that can serve as controls. And then specifically in China, they experienced mixed results with regard to export diversification. And let's see. I don't think I highlighted anything else here. And then there's another report using special economic zones to facilitate development policy implications. It says the immediate net benefit of a special economic zone, such as employment, capital flows, and technology flows, are often modest. And when considering the cost of infrastructure upgrading, foregone customs, revenue, subsidies, and incentives, the net benefits may even be negative. And then if foreign investment in the special economic zone fails to create jobs more widely within the economy and beyond the special economic zone, there'll be little impact outside the special economic zone. So these special economic zones might not increase development and or the economy, and could actually backfire on governments. They might not work. So they're not. I don't know what the word I'm thinking of. They're not magic. And when you're thinking about yeah, and when we were thinking about investing in fossil fuels, will a lot of the world is diversifying away from fossil fuels. That is something to consider. And then there was an article in the Pointer do, called "Do Special Economic Zones Really Work?" Economists break down Doug Ford's controversial Bill 5. And it says roads haven't been built. Oh. The zones are expensive, risky endeavors that require careful planning, said the World Bank senior economist Douglas Zing. And he said that in 2016. And they can be a tool for political speculation rather than a tool for economic development. 2017 study was skeptical of special economic zones, and then on average, special economic zones were not catalysts for national growth, and they underperformed compared to the rest of the national economy. And I don't think I highlighted anything else in the article. And let's see what else did I have. Oh. Yeah, so that looks like I covered what I wanted to cover for today. I know that it was a lot to look at. I do hope that you engaged with the discussion paper and challenge some of the assumptions about the lack of environmental challenge the lack of environmental respect in the legislation, proposed policy changes. Definitely, I am concerned about the potential for the extinction of different species. The rushed investment, the undercutting of environmental law, and the pre-approved projects. I hope that you have a good rest of your day, and I will be back next week with a different topic or an update on this one. I know that there has been changes to climate projections. There was news about climate projections. One climate projection was retired, but it's still bad news for the it's still overall bad news. But also somewhat good news in that we're not facing the worst impacts of climate change, but that projection was never going to happen in the first place. and then those always environmental registry updates. I have seen that the provincial government under Doug Ford is limiting freedom of information requests, or not instructing people to ministries to not process them. So that is troubling news as well. And I will try to find some positive news mixed in as well. Anyways, it's been over an hour, so I will end the recording here. And I hope that you have a good night.